Hello, welcome to this video. We are going to be taking a look at FileMaker. Let me get onto my switcher here. My name is Matt Petrowski. I'm bringing you this tutorial video. We're talking about this particular topic today. That is our section 8. We're going to be learning about the manage database. And what that means is we're basically looking at one of the areas that you're probably not super familiar with if you're new to FileMaker. And that's because we're going to be connecting two files together. And you might ask yourself, why would I ever connect two files? Well, that's what we're going to take a look at. So let's switch to my desktop here and take a look. You're going to see me occasionally look off to the side. That's because I have another monitor. No, I'm not distracted, but I'm looking at another monitor in order to control things. And it may look like I'm looking down to the bottom of the screen, actually. Today in FileMaker, if you'd like to follow along, we're going to be creating our own files for this particular video. In the previous videos in this series, I've been using the FileMaker example file, but this one will make more sense if we just create some super simple files so that we're not really confused by anything. Now, the area that we're going through is the manage area, and I've been walking through the whole of the FileMaker environment. I'm doing this from the standpoint of I wish I had this type of video series when I got started with FileMaker. Somebody would just show me what do I need to know about the FileMaker environment before I even start to build my database. So we haven't even started to build a database. We've been using FileMaker's own database to go through this example. We looked at this first 5 areas of the Manage submenu in the File menu here, and this is predominantly where we spend most of our time, in database, layouts, and scripts, and I've mentioned that. These latter 5 that we have right here, the external data sources, containers, custom functions, custom menus, and themes, you really don't access those too often, whereas the top 5, you're always in and out of those as you develop your solution. However, knowing about these help you plan for the type of solution that you're going to have. So today we're looking at external data sources, and then we'll be looking at the others as we go through. Now, this is going to be a super simple dialog box. I am going to create a new file first off, so we're going to need to select this option of New Solution, and I'll do that, and I'll create a dialog off screen. I'll bring that on screen, go to my desktop here, and I am just going to call this one File A, and it will create that new file, automatically come up with a defined database. We've seen that, not really too interested in that. We are going to create now a second file. We're going to go back to the same place that we were, New Solution, create that new solution, and I'm going to call this one File B. And it's going to be right next to File A. Again, I don't want this dialog box, so I'm going to click Cancel or hit Escape, get out of it, and on screen we will have the 2 files. So, if you remember, or if you've gone through the, I believe it was, video Lesson 4, you'll have to look at the playlist and see where it is, where we talk about security. In the security dialog, there's this ability for one file to open up another file, and I mentioned that that was a potential security hole that FileMaker had to close, and I suggested that you check the box. In fact, we're here with FileMaker. We'll take a super quick trip to show you where it is. If you haven't gone to that video, I'll ignore these permissions. I will click on the Detailed Setup, and I'm in the Manage Security dialog box. I will then go to the last tab area, the one that says File Access. And then over here, we've got this little checkbox, Require Full Access Privileges to use references to this file. Now, that's exactly what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be creating a reference from one file to another FileMaker file. So in the security video, I always suggested that people check this because it requires FileMaker, or it requires any other user or developer with a copy of FileMaker to actually have full access permissions in order to link to files. So here within File A, which I have on my screen, I'm going to go to the Manage External Data Sources, and we'll talk about this particular area of FileMaker. Now, the great thing about this particular video, let me back off a little bit there, is that we're going to be learning some things that apply to this particular dialog that will also apply to areas when we're actually scripting. FileMaker has a lot of common features that you find in a lot of different places. In this particular video, it's with regards to file paths, and we're going to talk about those. So in here, I currently don't have any existing data sources. And again, as a newer FileMaker developer, you really don't have to worry about this too much. Likelihood is you're not going to necessarily create these right off the bat. In most all cases, you're going to start creating one FileMaker file, and within that one FileMaker file, you're going to have multiple different tables. Same way, if you have one single spreadsheet, that's going to have multiple worksheets within it. So the reasoning as to why and when you want to create an external data source really comes into play when you have to talk about or think about your deployment strategy. How do I actually want to deploy this database? And I'll try to get into that towards the end of this video, but let's go through the actual process of what this dialog does in terms of connecting two files. Now you can see down here we've got our basic new, edit, and delete. I don't need to explain those to you. Cancel, OK. Again, like all the other FileMaker dialog boxes, we have this nice little ability to view by creation order, name, custom order. I've never used this in this particular dialog box because typically you have so few connections. I think the most I've ever seen myself use is maybe 3 external connections. Well, let's click the New button and we'll get a new dialog. Let's back that off a little bit more so that we can see what we're talking about here. So first off, you get to name the actual connection of what it's going to be. My suggestion here is that you typically name this something that it's going to make sense, where in the rest of FileMaker's environment, when you make selections, it makes sense. So if I'm connecting file A to file B, name this connection file B so that when I select it within FileMaker, I know that I'm connecting to file B. Now there's 2 types that you can actually of connections here. We've got a FileMaker connection. That's where one FileMaker connects to another FileMaker file, and we'll discuss why. And we have an ODBC connection. Now I cannot go over ODBC in this video as short as it's going to be. I really don't want to keep these longer than half an hour. That's a lot to take in. ODBC is your external connection to a data source such as MySQL or Oracle or Microsoft SQL database. In order to have this type of connection, there are multiple different steps that you have to take. In particular, the computer has to have a driver in order to actually connect to your external database or your external ODBC source. So we'll leave that one for a little bit later. What's most important that we're going to be taking a look at is this right here, and let's see if this works. I need to switch over to this tool right here, and I think this will work. These items right here is what we are most interested in. We're going to be learning about FileMaker's paths and how anything in FileMaker that you do needs to have a path or point to somewhere. Now, what's nice about learning this here right off the bat in the Manage External Data Sources is the fact that this will show up in the Export dialog. It can be relevant within the Import dialog if you're going to export things out of your database temporarily and then import things. These are common, and you will see these quite frequently when you're dealing with certain script steps where output and input actually has to happen. In this case, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be connecting one FileMaker file to another. Now, the key thing to remember here about this particular situation is that we have all of these different variations. The one that is the most common is this one right here, relative path. And that's when you have more than one FileMaker file, but they're all in the same folder. So you can see right here, well, they don't have to be. As you can see, we've got this directory name where we can actually have it, and then we have the file name underneath. It's going to be prefixed with this little system right here where you've got this keyword of file:. Now for a full path, you've got FileMac and FileWin. For something that's on the internet, here's a FileWin variable. But anything, if it's connecting over the FileMaker, over the network, where one FileMaker file is connecting to another, and I'll do my best to clarify and explain this, we've got this FMNet. So let's clarify what these types of connections would be, for example. So when you connect one FileMaker file to another FileMaker file, let's say we've got one file here and then we've got another file right next to it. And both of these files are on FileMaker server. Well, the one that would be used in that particular case would just be this simple file connected to a file name. In fact, the directory name wouldn't even be there. You would just have file name. When we wire the file up here, by connecting to add the file, what we're going to see is that it's probably going to use this one of a full path name. If we chose to connect this file, one FileMaker file to another FileMaker file, but it's in two different locations. Let's say one is on a server in California, and another FileMaker file is on a server in Texas. Completely different geographic locations. You're going to be going over the network, and in that case, you'd be using this one right here, FMNet, with the host IP and the file name. And in fact, it doesn't have to be a host IP address. FileMakers probably update their documentation. This could be a fully qualified or a domain name, if you will. Now, the last one that we're going to look at that we probably won't look at is this one right here, the variable. And the variable is an advanced developer method of dynamically connecting to a file. When would that come into play? Let's say, for example, you have multiple different geographic uses of FileMaker. This is really advanced here. Let's say you've got people in Tokyo and you've got people in California. And you're basically using a replication system where the data doesn't have to be absolutely real time. So what happens is 11 o'clock at night, maybe you're replicating data from the United States over to Tokyo. Well, in that scenario, what you can do is you can use a variable path that when you create a single FileMaker file, in this case, let's say it's file A, and then you give this file A to pretty much everybody. File B can actually exist in the United States or in Tokyo. That's our file where we're syncing data. Well, the people that are using file A in Tokyo, they really don't want to connect all the way over the internet to actually connect to file B in the United States because there's latency. There's a lot of round trips that take a lot longer of time. Well, if you're not worried about the data being real time and you're syncing it, pushing a copy of the same file B, you have a copy in the United States and a copy in Tokyo, you want the copy of the file A to be able to dynamically say, I want you to point to that file. And that may be a bad example because if you are replicating the data, you could just have a fixed link to the two different files. But suffice it to say, having a variable allows you to change the path within your FileMaker programming to point to where the file is going to exist in a different location. Now, hopefully this hasn't been too boring, and it probably, when I think about what I've been saying here, it is because all this doesn't necessarily make sense right away. Well, let's connect it ourselves and see how we can actually do that. So when I click here, I've already named my file to file B, and when I click on this option of add file, what FileMaker is going to do is it's going to give me a prompt, and then it would prompt me for the file that I want to connect to. Now, when I double click on file B here, we can see that FileMaker is actually going to put in file B. Now, FileMaker knows that the file is relative to the other file. It's right next to it. But here's what we're going to do. I'll click OK here, and I'm now going to close file B. So file B is completely closed. How do we know that file B is completely closed? We always make a quick trip to the window menu. And the reason is that when one given FileMaker file connects to and opens another FileMaker file, it will always show up in this area right here. Show window will have a submenu or a list of the files that any given FileMaker file has opened behind the scenes. And we're going to see that, and it's an important thing to know about this whole aspect of FileMaker. So currently there is no file B that is actually open, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to move that file. So this is a good thing to follow along if you're going to do this. Let me go to the Finder, create a new window, and we've got file B right here, and it was right next to file A. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this file. I'm going to create a new folder. I'll call it external, and I will drag file B into that external. So now I have two FileMaker files, but they are not right next to each other. So let's go back over to file A. Let's go back into our manage, into our external data sources. Let's double click on the external data source, and now let's add a file again. Now, as far as FileMaker is concerned, it is looking for a file, this file B, or whenever this file is referenced in the rest of your programming. It could be within a field in a calculation. It could be within a script, calling another script. Like we learned in value lists, it could be trying to get a value list from this other file. The first place FileMaker is going to look currently is in this location. Is there a file B right next to this particular file? If there is not, then it won't be able to access that information. So now let's add the file again. Let's go to external, and then we'll double click and we'll add file B. You can see that it's adding yet another path, and herein lies the key to how this particular dialog works and how it may be confusing for some people. You can have as many of these as you want. For example, it could be file, another folder, in another folder, file B. Now, one thing to note is you don't have to have the .fmp12 extension. That doesn't actually get added when you click the Add File. So, the search order in which FileMaker is going to look is straight from the top down. FileMaker is going to, when it has any type of reference in the FileMaker file A that points to B, whether it wants to run a script, whether it needs to show a layout, whether it needs to access a value list, anything that causes that reference to want to get information from that other file, FileMaker will search in the order of top down. So it's going to go file B here first, then it's going to look in external, then it's going to look in another folder. Now, this is a very important notion to understand, because when you are developing, what you can do is you can basically wire up or basically say this, where normally what's going to have, what FileMaker is going to do is it's normally going to look for a file B in this first location, and then it would look for, well, let's add that file, that location again. I don't know why I took it away. Let's add the location in the external. Then it will look for here. Then it would look for a third location, and let's use the fmnet example that we were going through. fmnet, and then let's give it a domain of wherever it might be. I usually prefix my servers with fms, so it would be something like fms.myserver.com file B. Now, this is something that's important to note about what's going on in this dialog, and FileMaker really should update their information. It used to be, before FileMaker had security issues, this whole notion of using a host IP was given as a rule of thumb that it's better to actually do something like this. This is a guess, 66.34.23.12 or something. You would typically put an IP address, which is always the absolute machine that one FileMaker file is going to relate to and point to another FileMaker file. But as soon as FileMaker had to update their security settings, when SSL became part of the picture, the only way that a SSL certificate is resolved as being valid, meaning the connection is secure, is through the name, unless you get the SSL certificate based on the IP address. So if you have older FileMaker solutions, or you are working on an older solution and it has an IP address, you're probably going to want to update that to the actual name of whatever the server is, especially if you're going through a secure connection. So using the name is better than using the IP nowadays, but yet they still suggest the host IP address in the dialog down here. So what's going to happen is, as you are developing local on your machine, you can put a copy of file B and you're developing on the machine. When you distribute the file, if it can't find this file, meaning if I gave file A to you or to somebody else, FileMaker is going to search for this. Nope, can't find it. It's going to search for this one. Nope, can find it. It's going to come to this next one. Okay, let's go to this server online. Okay, I found the file, and that's the one that it's going to open up. So the trick here is, there are times in this particular dialog where you actually need to hook up and wire a local file just for you as the purpose as the developer, but when it's deployed, your intention is for it to use one of the later paths. So that's my whole point of actually discussing this particular dialog. It really helps out when it comes to the import and the export script steps, which use this exact same dialog. So this is a very important thing to know. So let's go on with this. We're at 20 minutes now. And I want to get to those questions if you have any, because this is a little bit of a convoluted area of FileMaker, but it's definitely important to know, especially the whole why would I do this? So we're going to connect to just file B right here, and we're going to make a connection in our FileMaker database and actually see where and when it might come up. And we'll talk about the biggest reason why people actually do multiple files within FileMaker. So I'm going to need to go to my desktop, take that file B out of this. Actually, I'm going to view by list, go up one. We'll view this one by list, and that's how I'll get it out. So there we go, get rid of that folder. So file A is now next to file B, just like I had it before, and FileMaker will be able to find that reference. So now let's connect it. Let's actually connect file A to file B within FileMaker and see where it actually shows up. One of the first places where you can do this is based on layouts. So if I go into layout mode, this particular layout is based off of, as we can see, file A, which is a table occurrence that's based on a table in this file. Well, in order to create any FileMaker layout based on another layout, especially if the layout is in another table or in another file, we need to go into the defined database. We go into the relationships, and we need to add a table occurrence. So remember, if you need a refresher, go back to the video where we talk about manage database, where we go through the relationships a little bit. The relationship graph is basically the perspectives that you create of data. How does a given layout see whatever data it can see? So down here at the bottom, I'm going to create a table, and here's where you're going to see the connection. You get to specify where the data source is for certain objects in FileMaker. Here in the defined database, I can say that the data source for this table occurrence is going to come from a separate file. Likewise, if I'm in the manage scripts and I'm creating a script and I want to run a script that's in another file, then I'm going to, again, have this same dialog, and I'm going to select this data source, and we can see right there, there's the data source that I had named. I had named the data source file B, so it's very clear that I can see that where is this data going to come from? Is it going to come from a table that's in this file, or is it going to come from a table that's in another file? So I can select file B right here, and I can put this table occurrence onto the layout. Now the distinction here to note is this right here. Anything that's coming outside of the current file that you're working on, and this is the only distinction, I wish FileMaker would actually show more information, is that it is italicized right there. Right off the bat, that's the only visual cue that you get. I wish FileMaker had a little area at the bottom here where you could expand it and it would show you the information. If you hover over this, this will tell you the information that the source table of where it's actually coming from and the file it's actually coming from, the location. And here, a non-italicized means that this is a table occurrence based on a table in this same file. So that italicized, that's the only way that you can tell that it's a remote or a disconnected data source. So now what can you do? Well, now you can have a layout based on data that's in file B. We haven't even created any fields in these tables yet, but we can still create a layout based on this particular external table. So let's do that. I'm going to show my manage layouts. I did that with Command-Shift-L. I'm going to create a new layout. Here we have show records from, and here's where we can choose file B. So these are two completely separate files. We have file A and file B. I click finish, and I now have two layouts in this one file. But where one layout, file A, is actually referencing data in this one file, the layout file B is referencing data that's in another file. So here's the key to this whole lesson. In the world of FileMaker, what developers will do is they will use what's known as the separation model. And this is really pretty cool. I'm going to zoom in so that it's white here and switch to my highlight tool so that we can actually take a look at this. So here's where this comes into play. Let's say I have a nice little iPhone or an iPad right here. And then let's say over here we have a copy of FileMaker Server. I'll do my best here to make a little database representation. This is my FileMaker database. Where this comes into play is if I have a file here and on an iPad I have a file here, and this one happens to be file A, and this one happens to be file B, then what happens is I can have a disconnected situation. This separation model allows file A to actually be my user interface file, where file B is all of my data. Now, the cool thing about this situation is that if I throw more iPads into the mix, then what happens is each iPad can have its own copy of file A. Now, these really don't get out of sync. It's the same file, but what happens is file A, through that manage external data sources, when it looks across the network, is able to actually connect to, didn't want that one, wanted this one right here, file B, and this happens for all file A's. Now, the cool thing about this is that your data is centrally located and all users get to access that same data. But because file A is actually stored on these remote devices, or they could be computers, you get this whole disconnect type of situation, but not one that requires synchronization. What it means is that the user can actually open the file on the device, file A, and it can maybe do some minimalist stuff, but if there is no connection between the database and the data, let's say the internet is out, let's say this represents the cloud or the internet, what happens if there is no connection, file A, they can at least get the solution open. And when it opens, you can actually look at the fact of, am I able to connect to file B? And if the answer is no, then you just say, I'm sorry, there's no connection right now. We can't use the file. So this becomes a very empowering technique that you can use in FileMaker with regards to a distribution of data. It also comes into play where you can have multiple files on multiple different servers. So if these represent two different FileMaker servers, we've got server 1 right here, and then we've got server 2 right here. Then what happens is I can have a completely separate file C over here and really start to distribute the data out in terms of where it needs to connect. And nothing prevents file A from having a connection to file B and to file C. So this really enters the realm of the deployment strategy, and that's why I want to introduce you to this topic and this notion, because newer FileMaker users, they sort of stumble across it after the fact, and this really should be something you know at the outset so that you can plan in order to decide how you want to structure your system. So that's how that connection is going to work in terms of FileMaker's manage external data sources. It really is that simple, and when we go through that whole scenario of file A, file B, C, etc., don't think of them just in terms of FileMaker files. Yes, in that dialog, what you're able to do is you're able to connect, let's see, turn off the highlight there. There we go. You are able to, in the manage database or manage external data sources, you are able to actually specify that it is a FileMaker file, but remember, this also could be an ODB source. So FileMaker, its real power is if you have a corporate system, and that corporate system has a MySQL or an Oracle database somewhere else, and you want to make your FileMaker system work with that data, that's simply a matter of setting up that driver and pointing to the ODBC. And now your FileMaker data can completely commingle with the rest of the corporate data, and you have the real easy to use development in FileMaker's environment, but you're able to access the data that's out there in that, very scary corporate database. It is going to take a little bit of setup with that ODBC driver, but once you just walk through the steps and it's pretty well set up, you're doing pretty good. You can even set up the connection, the ODBC connection on FileMaker server, so that the file that's hosted on FileMaker server can go get that remote data, and you're able to see all the data within your FileMaker file. So this is a very key area to remember, that it's available, it's here for you to use. It's all simply a matter of where you point and how you point to those files. Again, if I was to select ODBC, the whole dialog is going to change. We can see that it's going to have all kinds of authentication information. You're going to have filters and tables and things that you can apply. Again, going through this part of the dialog is really beyond the scope of this video. We're hitting right at 30 minutes. I want to get into the questions if anybody has those. But for the most part, you're able to start to work with this concept by using FileMaker connections themselves. In fact, I needed to show you the one thing that I forgot to address about this whole file B and having the file and the references so that you know what's going on behind the scenes. Let's close this window and then we'll wrap up this video. I am going to switch to file A, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into browse mode and I'm going to close this file. I'm just going to hit the Command W a bunch of times and close all of the files. I'm going to go to open my recent and open file A. File A is going to open up. Now again, here is what you have to know as a new FileMaker user. If you want to check if FileMaker has opened any connected files, it's just a quick trip to the window menu. And if the window menu does not show that any other files have been opened in the background, hidden, then no other files have been opened. Currently, I'm looking at a layout that's based on everything that's in this file. That's file A. As soon as I switch to this layout, which is tied to file B, FileMaker will open that file behind the scenes and open it as a hidden, non-windowed application. So when we select file B, it doesn't look like anything changed. As far as we know, we just switched to another layout. But a quick trip again to that window menu shows us that the show window now has a hidden file that has been opened. And we know that it's hidden because of the fact that FileMaker has those parentheses around the actual file. Now here's a key thing to know as well about this process. FileMaker opened that data in the background, no matter where the file was, across the network or here on my local hard drive. It just opened the file and it did it in a hidden manner. As we're going to see in a future video, FileMaker has the ability to run a script on startup every time that a file is opened. That does not apply when files are opened as hidden. In other words, if file B had a startup script, that startup script would not have run when the file was referenced by file A. And this applies in a number of scenarios in terms of when it opens, and I'll tell you it is pretty much these. If there is a layout based on another file and you go to that layout, it will be opened as hidden. If you call a script that's in that other file, the file will be opened. If as a developer you go into Manage Database, you go to the relationship graph, any other file that's referenced via a table occurrence, those files will open. If there is a value list that is used, then that value list will cause the file to be opened. And then I think finally is if there is a field on a layout. So for example, it's very likely that I could be on layout A, based within file A, but if there's a field on this layout that points to something that's in file B, that file will be opened up and it will be hidden. So that's our key takeaway for this video. Always know that you can go to the window and actually look to see whether or not a hidden file that's been referenced via external data sources is actually going to open. And here's the thing, when I select this file, as soon as FileMaker does show the window, that's when FileMaker considers the file opened and it would open the startup script. And that's something that we're going to take a look at another time in another video, is where do we set the settings for a file and what happens when the file is actually opened. So that's probably going to give us our coverage for the external data sources for today. That's without going through the ODBC. We'll save that probably for another video way at another time. Or if you'd like more information, you'll probably be able to find that at my website at FileMakerMagazine.com. You can visit right here at FileMakerMagazine.com. If you're interested in being notified about when I'm going to do these videos, pretty much I'm keeping a pretty good pace of doing them at 11 o'clock Pacific Daylight Time every day. But if you'd like to be notified, you can click on this button right here on the website, the Scriptology Mastery course. You'll get on my mailing list, and then I'll be able to send you information that I'm going to do outside of just what's on the YouTube videos. That may be invitations to Slack channels or other private videos that I shoot on YouTube, or maybe even videos that are accessible on the magazine website. So with that, let's switch over and see if anybody has any comments. I don't have any right now. Let's switch to the chat window. There we go. If you have a question about today's particular lesson, it looks like I've got just 20 people on the stream right now, or 15. Then please feel free to ask that question. This is the time. I know that there's a little bit of a lag before you actually get to this point, just a small one. But that is what I have for external data sources. We'll see if anything shows up here in terms of questions as I get ready to wrap up this video. And again, if you are watching this after the fact, if you're not watching this real time via the stream as I'm recording it, and you have a question, feel free to actually put the question down in the comment section down below or on any of the videos. I'm notified when those questions come up. I'm definitely happy to answer those and go through whatever needs to be covered. Ahmed, it looks like a question came up. What about a prompt for a username and password for file B? That is an excellent question, Ahmed. When we talked about that data separation model that you'll hear within FileMaker forums and things to that effect, here is the scenario that you can run through in order to actually work through that particular situation. Let me switch to the desktop really quickly here. There we go. This is what I'm going to suggest you do to test out what happens when you get a password prompt. And if you go back to the security video and you remember what I said about the distinction between usernames and passwords, FileMaker, whatever file is opened initially, where authentication happens, where you put the username and password, say for example, file A was the file that's initially opened, and it asks the user for their username and password. If the same username and password exists in file B, then file A will just transfer that along and say, hey, I've already authenticated the user for file A. Let's just go ahead and open up file B. But here's a trick that you can do, and I've done this. When we were talking about that separation model where we put file A on an iPad and file B is actually on FileMaker server somewhere else on the internet, when file A opens, you can actually have file A open up no matter what. You can have it open up by default with just a very low level or a full access level, not full developer access, but a higher level of access, username and password. And we're going to see this in the file options. Then on file B, that's where you can put the actual true authentication that you want. So in other words, what I'm saying is file A can open up automatically, just like you open up all mobile applications. You just tap the icon and the solution just opens up. It opens up with some level of access. That's by putting a default username and password on the file. And when it connects to file B, that's when the authentication or the prompt would come up for the username and password. So there's really those two ways that you can do it. You can have the first file open up, not ask for anything, give some basic usability or some functionality. Eventually something is referenced, and it calls file B. When file B opens, it has the requirement for authentication on it and asks the username for their password in order to gain access. Option number 2 is file A opens up. It initially asks for a user's password and username. They enter that, and then they actually get transferred over to file B, and they don't have to enter it. Now, where does that come into play? Well, if you think about this scenario, if you are going to distribute file A to 15 different people, and they're all going to be on their iPad, you have to have 15 different accounts in file A. What happens when you add that 16th person? Well, you now need to make a new copy of file A and give it to all the different people, or at least the one person that you just added, they're the one that has to have their account in file A. That's a downside that we really want to avoid, where if we just make file A open up, not ask for a username and password, but then when it connects to file B, all we have to do is on FileMaker server, actually just add the new accounts to file B. And as soon as that is affected, all file A's really aren't impacted because file A is being used in order to facilitate the user interface. It just automatically opens up, but as soon as it does, if we're showing fields or layouts from file B, that's when it's going to ask the user for authentication. So it's a really advantageous system if you're using a disconnected model. So excellent question. I'm glad that you asked it and I was able to talk about that. All right, let's see if we've got any other questions that came in here. This method can be used for distributed databases. If database A is broken, client can access database B. They can, and that really boils down to where have you put the user interface. In this whole notion that we've been discussing here of the data separation model, typically the approach is to put all of the user interface, all of the layout design in file A, and then file B just acts as a host for the data, and it's actually shown within file A with all the fields sprinkled in. All the fields on file A are coming from file B. Well, if database A was broken or not usable, they really wouldn't have a user interface. And if you were going to go with that model, and you could put some basic user interface into file B where they could get some fundamental things done, but hopefully you just would be hoping that file A wouldn't break. But you can, if it's on two different servers, let's say that the file A isn't in a disconnected situation. Let's see, both of them are on FileMaker servers. This comes into play when you're doing trying to manage load. If FileMaker server, when you do some analysis and you sort of start to see, well, you know what? The shipping department, we're shipping so much stuff that it's really bogging down the FileMaker database. And accounting is complaining because FileMaker is slow. And let's say you don't have the resources to actually throw more at a server and really beef up the server, but you've got this other older computer that's available. Well, you can start to do some offloading by separating things out and giving accounting their own file and putting them on a separate FileMaker server. Now, you have that additional cost, but again, this is a deployment strategy where if you think about trying to segment out your data, but not too much, I mean, we're at a beginner level here, then you get to plan a structure that allows for a little bit more scalability in terms of growth. If you are a newer FileMaker developer, the suggestion I'm going to make is we're going to stick all within one file, but we definitely need to know about these things in terms of how they work. It helps us with regards to planning for the future and what's happening down the line. So it looks like I don't have too many other questions. Thank you for asking those that you have. I'm sure it's helping other people out with regards to the video. As I always say in all of my videos, I'd like to wish you much luck and happy FileMaking. That's going to bring this video to a wrap. I think what you'll do is you'll find a subscribe that will come up here, and maybe the next video in the series, as soon as I've got it done, will come up over here. So again, feel free to email me at editor@FileMaker Magazine. And as always, and until next time, happy FileMaking. See you later.